Thank you for joining me. This is our fifth Lenten talk, covering the stories of Genesis. In this video, we plan on covering the cycle of Jacob, spanning chapters 25 through 36. And the guiding question that I want you to be thinking about is, what does it mean to wrestle with God? In the fourth talk, we covered the story of Abraham and Sarah, and underlying that story was the question of the promised seed, the son, Isaac. In tonight's talk, Isaac plays the role of husband to Rebekah, the father of Esau and Jacob. In other words, in this video, we will pass over what we see in the mosaic here, the rather beautiful and peaceful story of Isaac receiving his wife, Rebekah. We will break this video up into three parts. First, we want to just summarize the Jacob cycle, and we'll slow down in a couple different places. That will be our second part. We're going to slow down where Jacob has the vision of the ladder, and when Jacob wrestles with the angel. And then finally, we will spend the rest of the talk looking at the spiritual reading of this passage. This I've given you as the chiasmus of the Jacob cycle, a concentric rhetorical structure. The focal point is when Rachel gives birth and Jacob decides to return home to Canaan. So A and A, they match each other, they parallel. We're going to be focusing on the messengers, the angels, the two appearances of angels to Jacob. I encourage you to find yourself in this story and hold that question. What does it mean to wrestle with God? So at this point, pause the video, read Genesis 25 through 36 on your own. Genesis 25 opens, "These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took to wife Rebekah." As we find out, Rebekah is barren. She inquires to the Lord, and the Lord says to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the elder shall serve the younger." So Rebekah is barren, much like Sarah was barren. And we'll see this repeated throughout the scriptures with Rachel, and then later with Hannah and others. So when we meet Jacob, we discover that from birth, this child was born for conflict, struggle, subterfuge. So inside Rebekah are twins, and she can tell they're not going to get along, echoing Cain and Abel. Now the name Jacob means one who grasps at the heel, or it can mean one who supplants. So he comes out behind Esau, grabbing his heel, and his life will be one of struggle, one of wrestling, one of Hebrew Jiujitsu. Verse 24. "When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came forth red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came forth, and his hand had taken hold of Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Esau was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob." So next we find this revealing story. I won't read it, but it's from their youth. Esau sells his birthright for a single meal. Esau, a man of the flesh, of immediate pleasure. And Jacob, man of the tents, he deceives him. But he deceives him to receive the birthright. I don't quite like this representation because they already have beards, but you get the picture. So in chapter 26, we read the final wife story, the wife-sister story, and we also read that Esau takes two Hittite wives, making life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. And we turn now to chapter 27, where we have this dramatic story of Rebekah helping Jacob deceive Isaac and steal away Esau's blessing. I won't read it all here, but I just want to make a couple of points. First, Jacob put on the clothes of Esau, animal skin around his neck and arms, to come to his father. And Jesus comes with the voice of the only begotten, and yet he comes also with our hands. So Jesus puts on our clothes, our body. and he became similar and equal to us in everything except sin. Second, Jacob shows that whatever else you might say about him, he places a high value on the promises given to Abraham and to Isaac. He believes them to be true. And so he's like those who take heaven by force. Now, Rebekah continues to be the driving force of the story, encouraging Jacob. She overhears Esau planning to murder, so she convinces Isaac to send Jacob to his mother's family in search of a bride. Because Esau hasn't been marrying from the family. He hears this, and Esau decides that because his Canaanite wives won't please him, he decides to take a wife from the daughter of Ishmael. So Esau's early life right here, we see that he's not going out of his way to continue this line. We see a lack of seriousness about the promises of God. He doesn't value them. He trades them away for a single meal. So in Genesis 28, Jacob, in search for a wife, must retrace his grandfather Abraham's journey from Mesopotamia. And he finds himself in a liminal space. And here I'm going to read from Genesis 28, 10 and following. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and ascending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your descendants. And your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And by you and your descendants shall all the families of the earth bless themselves. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done that of which I have spoken to you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid, and said, How awesome is this place! There is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone which he had put under his head, and set it up for a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel, meaning house of God. But the name of the city was Luz at the first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and the stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that thou givest me, I will give the 10th to thee. Now, the word ladder in Hebrew is solom, and it occurs only once in Hebrew scriptures. There's a technical term for this. This is a hapax legomenon. It's a technical meaning, which means a word that occurs once. So we don't quite know what it means. It's a ladder. It's steps. It's a ziggurat. It was a ladder. Consider the ziggurat going back to Ur. Right? This is a ladder ascending to heaven. It was a ladder that traversed creation, reaching beyond the visible and invisible heavens. And it permeated even into the uncreated. And somehow the Lord reveals himself to Jacob, the Lord himself. When Moses stood in the uncreated fire at Sinai, he stood there. God showed him the creation of the visible world, which according to tradition Moses records in the first chapter of Genesis. And so here Jacob, he sees something of the whole visible cosmos and beyond, the invisible realm of the angels. And then beyond that, he sees God himself. Not God in his unknowable essence, but God revealed as the vision of the uncreated, the crown of human experience. So Jacob goes through an initiation, and God meets him. there's this idea that there's some opening of communication between the human and divine. There's a return to Eden. Coming down, a lifting up. This is a foreshadowing of the temple, Bethel, the house of God, where heaven and earth are connected as by a ladder. This is a restoration. This vision will be fulfilled in Christ, even according to Christ's own words. In the Gospel, according to John in chapter 1, verse 49, Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel." Jesus answered him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You shall see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." So Jesus on the cross is the ladder. This is the axis mundi, the center pole that unites heaven and earth. Now, the stone under Jacob's head, you could say, represents Christ himself upon the church that he has established. He's anointed by the Father for our salvation. He is the ladder that connects us. He connects the heaven and the earth. He joins the heavenly with the earthly in his body. Now, when is this story of Jacob's ladder read in the church? Where does it appear in the church lectionary? It appears at the feast of the Theotokos. So the ladder is Christ, but the ladder is also the Theotokos. Symbolically, she is the ladder because she combines heaven and earth. She receives the descending word and she lifts up the earth. She's the physical bridge between God and humanity. From the Akthis hymn to the Theotokos, we sing, "Hail, hail, heavenly ladder by whom God came down. Hail, bridge leading earthly ones to heaven." This is the same pattern that we have seen with Sarah and Abraham. And when when Jacob wakes up from the dream, he says, "This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." And so Mary is called the house of God. Mary is also called the gate of heaven because she's the house in which God dwells, in her own body as a temple. So there's this union, this transference of divinity to the humanity and the lifting up. And this happens in the Theotokos. We can see one more step in this symbolic fractal from the Theotokos to the church. The church is the house of God, the gateway to heaven, the path leading all the faithful on the blessed path to the eternal heavenly kingdom. This, of course, is the intention of God, that each of us would experience within us, within our hearts, our minds, our bodies, the ladder of divine ascent, and the vision of the uncreated within the created. The Theotokos was the first to contain this ladder within her being. So Jacob, he sees God. It transforms him into a new creature, and he'll never be the same. His motivations, his desires will be transformed. So Jacob journeys to Haran. He arrives there. He sees Rachel, his relative. They have not taken off the stone, and Jacob will be the one to roll away the stone from the well. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. Of course, this is a story that is recapitulated throughout Scripture. The bridegroom meeting his bride at the well. Christ and the Samaritan woman. This actually is Jacob's well where Christ meets the Samaritan woman. So now Jacob has arrived at his at Laban's house. He's received, he's welcomed, and he loves Rachel. So he makes an agreement to work for 7 years for her. And they seemed to him but a few days because of the love that he had for her. But Laman's a trickster. They're all tricksters. Laman replaces Rachel with Leah. Jacob doesn't realize this. But in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And there's this wonderful rabbinic interpretation of this one midrash gloss. And I'll quote it here. All night he kept calling her Rachel, and she kept answering him, yes. But in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to her, liar, and a daughter of a liar. Leah answered, can there be a schoolmaster without any pupils? Was it not just this way that your father called out to you, Esau, and you answered him by saying, yes? So when you called out Rachel, I answered you the same way. So Jacob has to agree to work 7 more years. Rachel is given to him, and he loved her more than Leah. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld you the fruit of the womb? Then she said, here is my maid, Bilhah. Go into her, that she may bear upon my knees, and even I may have children through her. So she gave him her maid Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. So there's some problems. Leah gives him a woman to sleep with also, a handmaiden, and so does Rachel. So he starts producing children by these 4 women. Now, finally, Rachel produces Joseph. We turn to verse 25 of chapter 30. When Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go home to my own country. Give me my wives and my children whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know the service which I have done to you. And Laban says, sure, maybe. First we need to sort this stuff out with our flocks. He said, you can get the spotted and the speckled ones. So he plays a trick on him. He removes them all. And so Jacob has to do his own intrigue. He removes some of the genetic anomalies, and Jacob figures out a way to breed more with spots and stripes. So we've hit the turning point. Jacob is heading back home to Canaan, and a threat looms, Esau. So he departs. He first has to convince Leah and Rachel that they can leave also, because they're sort of the property of of the father, Laban. And so they're off. They've departed. Verse 22 in chapter 31. When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, take heed that you do not say a word to Jacob, either good or bad. So the father-in-law is pursuing them. He catches up to them. You can see this in this 6th century illuminated manuscript. Here's a close-up. Laban's not happy. He finally says, okay, you've taken my daughters, but you also took my house gods. So he goes into the tent. He's looking for them. But Rachel is playing a major trick here. Rachel, in verse 34. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in a camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So he searched, but he did not find the household gods. So 3 days later, he's traveling after them. He catches up to them 7 more days, and his household gods have been plundered. Jacob and Laban make a covenant. They make peace, and we move to chapter 32, the main chapter that we want to focus on today. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's army." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent his messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing him, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban, and I stayed until now. And I have oxes, asses, flocks, men servants, and maidservants, and I have sent to tell my lord, in order that I might find favor in your sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and 400 men with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. So he's going to meet his brother who wanted to murder him. He prays for deliverance, and he comes up with a plan. So he sends across the river, in different waves, his people, hoping to appease Esau. And then he spends the night. Here we arrive at Jacob's wrestling match. This will be our focus. Verse 22. The same night he arose and took 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything he had. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him unto the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and Jacob's thigh was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go, unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and your men, and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Tell me, I pray, your name." And he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his thigh. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh on the sinew of the hip. Chapter 33. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and his 2 maids, and he put the maids with her children in the front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. So consider the icon that came before this. When Jacob encounters Esau, he receives him not with violence or vengeance. While previously Esau had pursued his brother with an army, now he falls on his neck and cries. So this brotherly love is reestablished between them. And furthermore, in the scriptures record, God's blessing upon Jacob was so strong that he saw the face of Esau as the face of God. In order to receive God's blessing, Jacob humbled himself to the end in all his night struggle with God. He humbled himself in front of Esau as well, making 7 prostrations before him as he approached. And God answered him through his humility. Because you have been strong with God, you will be strong with men. So Jacob returns to Bethel. God affirms his covenant with Jacob, with Israel. Rachel dies, giving Jacob his last son, Benjamin. And so we end up at this point in the story with the 12 tribes of Israel, the genealogy, which will be fulfilled later in Christ with his 12 disciples. So now we return to Genesis 32:22 with Jacob's wrestling match. And previously, Abram became Abraham, Sarai became Sarah, and now Jacob becomes Israel. We're going to look at the literal meaning of it and then work towards the spiritual. So Jacob fears the wrath of Esau, but it wasn't him that he was supposed to wrestle with, it was with God. And at the ford of the Jordan, he's standing kind of at the entrance to the promised land. After his exile, he wants to return to paradise, and a divine being bars his way. That doesn't deter him. He wrestles, he wins. The other connection here that we would find is that at the river, you're thinking the river Jordan, the submersion into the waters is a death. So this is evoking the creation story, Noah's story, and the future of the Red Sea that the Israelites will have to pass through, and then finally with Joseph, who enters the promised land through the Jordan. So he brings us through death into life. And of course, in baptism, we receive a new name. And Jacob, too, in his baptism, receives a new name, Israel. This story has a number of playful puns in Hebrew. We start with the name Jacob, which means one who grasps at the heel, supplanter, Jacob. And of course, to wrestle is abak. The river is Jacob. His dislocated hip, Yakah. In Israel, it doesn't sound similar, but it means one who strives with God. So all of these are playing with Jacob, wrestling. And then the last to point out is Peniel, which means the face of God. He has seen God face to face. This isn't the first time in Genesis where there's been this confusion between an angel and God, or a man and God. In the hospitality of Abraham, 3 men appear, but Abraham worships one. And as the story unfolds, we might think, oh yeah, he was wrestling with an angel, but Jacob doesn't say that. Jacob says, no, I have seen God face to face. He's under no illusion. So this is like a culmination of all human experience. It's the experience of the divine. To become God-like, to find ourselves in the image and likeness of God, uniting heaven and earth. So it's one thing to see God on a heavenly ladder, and it's quite another thing to wrestle him down below. And how is it possible? Jacob didn't just wrestle God, didn't just see God, but he didn't even let him go. And from now on, he's going to have a limp. He's not going to stride with arrogance. He's going to take some steps with humility. This too also means that he's no longer going to have children. It's coming to an end. He has one more child after this, which is Benjamin. So what we've seen is a transformation through God's grace and Jacob's exertion, his own will, where he has been transformed into Israel. So at this point, we're going to move into the typological understanding. I'm going to be showing some images, and I'd like you to ask these 3 questions with each image. You can pause it. How do they shed light on the story? What do they invoke in you? And then finally, the overarching question, what does it mean to wrestle with God? So pause the video, ask yourself these questions, and please write them down. Each image will have a number so you can locate it later. The first 2 show the man struggling while the angel is steadfast, unmoved. This one's quite beautiful, I think, because you can feel Jacob in his strength grasping the angel, not letting him go. This woodcut is quite beautiful in that they are both swirling together, and you also see the ladders in the background. This one is my favorite. It's quite contemporary. You have clearly a Jewish Jacob, and the angel is surreal, and in his cloak you can see a ladder forming within him. Chagall did many of these. This is the first I'll show you. I've got one more. Here we have arrived at the more ancient Christian versions, illuminated manuscripts, mosaics, icons, frescoes. The God of Jacob is the God of Jesus Christ. Not only is he susceptible to wrestling, he's capable of being nailed to a cross. So I'd like us just to be seeing within these Christ. Father Stephen Freeman writes, the God of the Christians can not only enter a wrestling match, he can lose. But of course, by losing, he wins. By dying on the cross, he destroys death. This is a modern version of the same one. In fact, in our local parish, St. Elias in El Dorado, you can see this painted in the back of the church. At this point, I'm going to read a number of different passages from fathers who make use of interpreting this passage. The first is the earliest from St. Clement of Alexandria. This was the man led and brought and wrestled with and anointed the athlete Jacob against evil. Now that the Word was at once Jacob's trainer and the instructor of humanity appears from this. He asked, it is said, his name and said to him, tell me, what is your name? And he said, why is it that you ask me my name? For he reserved the new name for the new people, the babe, and was as yet unnamed, the Lord God not having become yet man. Yet Jacob called the name of the place Face of God, for I have seen, he says, God face to face, and my life is preserved. The face of God is the Word by whom God is manifested, made known. Then also was he named Israel, because he saw God the Lord. It was God, the Word, the instructor, the teacher, who said to him again afterward, fear not to go down into Egypt. See how the instructor follows the righteous man, how he anoints the athlete, teaching him to trip up his antagonist. So the angel of the Lord is here, and this is Christ, wrestling with Jacob, teaching him, training him. Our next quote is from St. Gregory Nazianzen's second theological oration, Oration 28. And Jacob dreamed of a lofty ladder and stair of angels, and in a mystery anointed a pillar, perhaps to signify the rock that was anointed for our sake, and gave to a place the name of the house of God in honor of him whom he saw, and wrestled with God in human form, whatever this wrestling of God with man may mean. Possibly it refers to the comparison of man's virtue with God's. And he bore on his body the marks of the wrestling, setting forth the defeat of the created nature. And for a reward of his reverence, he received a change of his name. Instead of Jacob, Israel, that great and honorable name. Yet neither he nor any one of his behalf, until this day, of all the 12 tribes who were his children, could boast that he comprehended the whole nature or pure sight of God. So in these first two quotes, we see that they're making a Christological analysis of this, that this is a type of Christ, whether it be the ladder, the pillar, or the angel. But Christ as the teacher, Christ wrestling with them and working with them, leads this towards a moral or a spiritual understanding of the story. And so with that, we turn to, this is another mosaic, a fresco rather, from the 17th century. But now we're going to move to St. John of the Ladder of Divine Ascent, who is basing his book with 30 rungs on this vision of Jacob. And we're in the 30th step. I long to know how Jacob saw you fixed above the ladder. That climb, how was it? Tell me, for I long to know. What is the mode? What is the law joining together those steps that the lover has set as an ascent in his heart? I thirst to know the number of those steps and the time required to climb them. He who discovered your struggle and your vision has spoken to us of the guides, but he would not, perhaps he could not, tell us any more. So the Church, through the vision of Jacob and the writing of the Fathers, teaches us how to ascend, and yet it's a mystery. And now I arrive at my favorite version of the icon of Jacob wrestling with the angel. It follows, here I'm quoting Father Emilianos of Simonopatra, it follows that we experience prayer initially when we start to pray as a wrestling match, as a struggle, not in the sense that it's difficult to pray, that I have to struggle to gather my thoughts and overcome my sleepiness or weariness in my knees, or that it occurs to me to scratch myself and I don't know what to do and I fight against scratching. Not struggle in the sense that I'm hungry and I want to go and eat and I say, no, I should continue to pray. I do not mean that struggle. That's the ascetic struggle. That's something different, another thing altogether. I'm speaking of the struggle we have, not with ourselves. What we said just now was with ourselves, but the struggle we have with God. I wrestle with God. So Saint Seraphim is wrestling with God. He's on the stone. He's climbing the ladder. He's wrestling with God himself. As St. Paul says, contend with me in prayer. Going back to this pattern that we saw before, bringing down the descent and the ascent. And we said that this was a pattern found in the heart, in the womb. It's a fractal. It's a repetitious version. All of these icons, frescoes, mosaics are of the same thing. Our second to last one was the icon of the burning bush. And here it's a fractal-like pattern of the Theotokos. She has blue angels on up, down, left, and right. And then you have these red arrows jutting out. These are the red arrows of the four evangelists. And then more angels forming and completing the bush. In the upper left-hand corner is Moses at the burning bush. So these are types of the Theotokos found in the Old Testament. On the right, you have Isaiah receiving the burning coal in tongs. The bottom left is of Ezekiel in his vision of the gate of the temple, for the Theotokos is the gate. And then on the bottom right is Jacob with the ladder. We must hold on to what we love. This is what it means to wrestle with God. To detach ourselves from everything that's meaningless and useless, that won't help us in our journey forward. That's a message for us today. We must hold on to God until He gives us His blessing, and then we will be wounded by His love, a wound that will follow us. And so I close with a passage from Hosea chapter 12. In the womb he took his brother by the heel, and in his manhood he strove with God. He strove with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. He met God at Bethel, and there God spoke with him, the Lord, the God of hosts. The Lord is his name. So you, by the help of your God, return, hold fast to love and justice, and wait continually for your God. Thank you.